All right, great. So welcome everyone to the Privacy First AI building compliant data foundations for scalable innovation. We're delighted to host this discussion today. I'm Jeff Lunsford from Tealium. Tealium is a software company that helps the biggest enterprises in the world collect, enrich, and manage their customer data in a privacy compliant way. We work with 10 of the 20 largest banks, 6 of the 10 largest telcos, 3 of the 10 largest pharma, big companies around the world, big retail, big tech. And so definitely have our hands in a lot of this topic. And we're joined here today by Dan George, also from Tealium, and by Amlan Maitra from PepsiCo. I'm going to let each of them, Amlan, why don't we start with you, introduce themselves and what you're up to at PepsiCo, and then we have a good list of discussion topics after that.
Yes. Hi, Jeff, and thank you to everyone who's joined today. And I also wanted to take the opportunity to thank CDO Magazine for hosting this discussion this morning. As you know, PepsiCo is a household name. The PepsiCo's products are enjoyed over in more than 200 countries and territories around the world each day. So the vision at PepsiCo is to become the global leader in convenient snacks and beverages by what we call winning with purpose. To that end, as you can imagine, data analytics, insights, and increasingly now AI is very important enabler in realizing that vision. I have had a great journey here at PepsiCo. I've been with the company for 20 years. It's a really long time, but every single day has been exciting. In my current role, I am part of our data and analytics and AI organization, which is part of our strategy and transformation pillar as it rolls up into our CEO. I lead the enterprise data team here at PepsiCo. So me and my team are accountable for all global data engineering, data management, and all the supporting data BI integration platforms. I also have accountability for our, I call it data BI, data integration ops, centrally for PepsiCo. So this is a centralized organization, which is a result of a very big transformation that we have gone through in the last couple of years, from more of a decentralized structure to becoming much more centralized. And the idea is to drive scale and synergies by focusing on some of the most important global digital and AI solutions that we want to drive across the company. So in that context, my remit includes building the data backbone, where we've been on this multi-year journey, building out what we call the enterprise data foundation to source, to ingest, and then transform data into one standardized, normalized, common data layer, which can then enable multiple digital analytics and AI solutions spanning the entire value chain from seed to shelf, as we call it, across all of our geographies. So source, normalize, catalog data once, treat it like a product, and then reuse many times. So again, really excited to be on this panel and have a really good discussion. Back to you, Jeff.
Fantastic. Source, normalize. That's great. And label. Dan, please give us your extensive history in the space and what you do all day long as a field CTO at Tealium.
Sure. Thank you for the introduction, and it's good to talk to everybody today. I've been in the industry for, as Jeff is saying, 20 years now. I started out back in the day at AOL as a database administrator, and even back then, the primary role was to provide reports to the executive team as far as the call center data that we were managing as part of the group that we were in, whether that was member retention, customer support, anything along those lines. So I've been collecting data within platforms and databases for a very long time. Just like Amlan said, with that enterprise data foundation, we were trying to provide an enterprise data foundation for call center data and provide detailed reporting on that information. But since then, I received my master's degree in computer systems, information systems and technology, to be specific, right as I joined Tealium 14 years ago. It's actually kind of funny to me to think in the software space, 14 years with a company is a pretty long time. But when you start talking to CPGs and banks and a lot of other industries, you're just getting started at 14 years. But I've been closely involved with the customer success team for the first 6 years here at Tealium. I was responsible for establishing Tealium IQ, the tag management solution, and the customer support model. I was also on the team that was the category formation for the CDP, as well as responsible for launching several other products. But I have, at least in the last 8 years, have been on the sales side in a consulting capacity in various roles. But the key element is what Amlan was saying is this: when we have data coming in to be used for AI, and that data has to be consented, making sure it's clean and correlated and as correct as possible before it even goes to the AI system. That's a focus of where I come in and trying to help companies strategize around how to do that, or even where AI fits as far as where is your model? Is it hosted within your own ecosystem, within a Snowflake Databricks type of ecosystem, and trying to bring those models into the moment as a customer is interacting on the website to improve their experience, and trying to architect and design solutions to support that. Those are the types of conversations that I get involved in. But you'll hear some of that as we get through the conversation today. But Jeff, thank you. I'll hand it back to you.
Great, great. Thank you for the introduction. So I thought we would start this morning with the first part of Amlan's mandate, where he said source. So where do we get all this great customer data? From what customer interaction points? Is it web, mobile, call center, point of sale? Reseller partners, just sort of what are the sources of this data, and then from there we can work further back into the data supply chain when we get to AI, and we'll talk about that. But I think it's important for this audience to understand where we source it and how we source it.
Yeah, and it's a really good question, Jeff, to get started. So I'll probably open up the aperture a little bit more in terms of, if you think about a CPG company, a manufacturing company, literally, as I was referencing earlier, you're talking seed to shelf, right? From a value chain standpoint. So if you think about, first party, second party, third party designation is applicable for us. So if you think about some of the internal data sources, right? Obviously, the first that will come to mind is the ERP backbone, and we're a largely SAP shop around the world. We're in the process of rolling out S4, for example, as a capability as a part of our overall SAP backbone. And so that obviously happens to be one of our major data sources into the lakehouse for most of our core master and transaction data across the value stream. So be it order to cash, record to report, make to deploy, procure to pay, et cetera. So all of your standard master data, transaction data that comes in. We also have Salesforce as our key sales go-to-market platform. And there are other source systems that provide probably promotions data, supply chain planning systems, inventory management systems, warehouse management systems, et cetera. Those are all key data sources coming in. As far as the external data landscape is concerned, in particular, as you think about second and third party data, syndicated data like Nielsen and Circana and Kantar, and other retailer partner data like Walmart Scintilla. Those are all sources that we're dealing with. Clearly, from a first party standpoint, loyalty data, our company websites, et cetera. All of that is source of data. And again, the one call out I will have, at the onset is from a PepsiCo standpoint, you'll hear me reference more a consumer and a customer. A consumer is the end consumer, essentially you and me. When we talk customer from PepsiCo standpoint, it often is retailers like Walmart and Target and Costco and so on, right? So there's a slight distinction in terminology. And so we obviously from a pattern standpoint, a lot of this data that I was just talking about is going to be batch, right? But then there are real-time streaming patterns in place as well that we have in order to be able to handle various frequencies of data input into our data foundation. I'll pause and maybe pass it over to Dan for your thoughts.
So that's an amazing surface area of data that you have to deal with, and it's interesting to batch versus real time, because that's sort of Dan and mine's world is when we talk about privacy first AI, privacy implies that consumer in your terminology, and so that in our experience, that is the data when it comes to AI that you kind of need for privacy reasons to be streaming that in real time, because you need to know consent status, and you can't really violate someone's privacy, whether it's with ad targeting or AI. So we spend a lot of time in that world. Dan, why don't you kind of unpack that, go back, okay, the source of data, but let's focus on the consumer data for the enterprise companies we work with, and in how do they collect that data, and then send it off, enrich it, label it, the things that Amlan was talking about before the AI use case.
Yeah, it's a great set. Thank you. So it's interesting when I think about this, and Amlan, hearing about your side as far as the customers and the consumer, because both of those are definitely relevant when you're talking about real-time data flow and how your business team would do a B2B motion for targeting a business. But as you're mentioning, a lot of those are batch processes that are important. But from the consumer side of the house, that is one of the biggest focuses of ensuring consented, controlled data from the point of collection outbound. So many of the focuses that we see from a practitioner side of the house, where companies are looking to leverage this information, the most common one everybody integrates with is websites and mobile apps. Those are huge, right? Even from what we see, mobile apps make up 55% of the overall volume that we process from a Tealium processing point of view, just to show, that is obviously one of the biggest levers to pull for getting some of that real-time data into systems. We're seeing call centers, even ERPs, CRMs, even the channel integrations that you have, as far as like if someone opens an email through a marketing automation platform and that information needs to feed through the platform. Those are the types of data sources that we're seeing from the consumer base, as far as what are those interactions, how are they actually going to have to work. What's key then is ensuring that consent is tied together no matter where that data source is coming into play. So a lot of the questions that customers are asking us when we're saying customers, or those are the Tealium end users, are if we have someone give consent on a mobile app and give a different consent on web, how do we manage that? And that's providing a tool that allows the business to control and apply their logic for how to manage that within a user interface that the business and marketing team can integrate with. And what the same element goes as far as the data preparation of using a user interface to do that data preparation, whether that is native data management tools or even custom data management tools that allow your team to go in and manage that data appropriately. So, for example, working within regulated industries like healthcare and pharma and banking industries, a lot of times the customer identity is considered highly sensitive information, or PII, and being able to hash that data before it even goes into like an enterprise data foundation. And so those are a lot of the key elements of an enterprise data ready platform that gives the tools of collecting data from multiple sources, ensuring that before you even collect it, is it consented, and then doing a lot of the data preparation in the moment. So what we say here at Tealium is getting the data correct at the moment of capture, instead of trying to do a lot of the data processing in something like an enterprise data framework. Let's make sure that the data is correct at the point of collection, so that when we're talking about privacy first, that your backend systems are doing less of that. The privacy first comes at the point of collection.
Yeah, great. So thank you. So we talked about it's interesting, Amlan, you said, you've moved from a decentralized to a centralized architecture for your data lake. But when we're talking about end consumer data, we also have, and you're a global company in 200 countries, so we have these data residency requirements. So for the participants of this webinar, could you give us a little bit of insight into how you both get a global view, but then also abide by the data residency laws around the world?
Yeah, sorry, just trying to come off of mute. Yeah, I think that's a critical point, and it's almost foundational or fundamental to the core design principles as we have embarked on creating a data foundation. It's absolutely paramount, right? So be it privacy related policies or jurisdictional constraints, that they absolutely have to be baked in to anything that we do. So any of the data residency laws or restrictions that you're talking about are baked fundamentally into the design. So we must have clarity on what data sets are subject to these restrictions, because it's not often an all or nothing sort of a proposition, right? And have clear policies, guidelines, and architectures to handle those particular data sets. And then essentially ensure that those data sets are ring-fenced and handled suitably. So sometimes in partnership with local partners. So that is one of the insights I think we've found very, very critical in terms of partnering with local providers, often who have a first-hand understanding of some of the nuances of those policies and have the capabilities there, as opposed to try to, exactly to your point, try to do things all call it from a very US-centric view. And so that's what we have done, and with significant success. And so we have built these requirements into our North Star architecture patterns as well, in terms of when we encounter these jurisdictional and or other policies, that we can then quickly call up the patterns that are supposed to be handling these sorts of subject areas or data sets that are subject to these restrictions, and then go into more from an execution standpoint of, hey, how do we partner with the local team? So we obviously have a highly geographically dispersed team structure in terms of having folks available in the local markets who understand some of the nuances of the local policies, and then ideally partner with some of the local technology providers as well to bring this to life. Again, fitting within the overall construct and the broad guardrails and guidelines of how we are trying to set up the data foundation, let's say, for the entire organization, but with those nuances in mind.
That's great. Okay, so we've got the data collected. We are consolidating the data around an architectural privacy by design and compliance by design, structure. So we're abiding by all the privacy laws. Now let's talk about AI, right? So, and let's focus on first on consumer-facing AI, since we're talking about privacy and customer data. So, Dan, why don't I ask you? I know you've probably spent a lot of time as a field CTO with customers that are taking this data that has been resolved around identity, but it's still privacy compliant. So we know the consent status, right? And then how are they using this data with applied AI out there in the field? What are you seeing across Tealium's customer base?
Yeah, it's actually, in my opinion, a very exciting topic to talk about, because I'm just seeing so many different elements of this across the business. And there are a few key features that I specifically want to touch on. And the first is, it comes down to, where is your AI model hosted and how is it being managed? And we see customers that, and within extremely regulated industries, they don't want their models to be hosted externally within another platform. So the question becomes, how do we get these scores available for the purposes of activation? And it goes back to what I was mentioning earlier, as far as meeting the customer where they are in the moment to improve their customer experience. And so we see customers taking a couple of different approaches there as far as the model outputs that are being generated. Those outputs are just being hosted within their environment and then ingested into Tealium so that Tealium acts as a caching system. And as a customer comes to the website, that caching system is available to bring those AI models into the moment to be able to affect that customer experience. Just to tie it back to what I was mentioning, that's a very common element of this, of just ingesting the models. Another great feature that I see on this is that the model is hosted in a real-time capacity. For example, within a solution like a Databricks, where Tealium in its real-time nature is able to trigger an API call and actually hit that model that's being hosted to get a response back in the moment. And I want to pause there on that one, because that one's really key in my opinion, because in the first method that I described to you, that model doesn't have access to real-time data. It's a historical collection of data, and the model has been output, and it's still powerful. But the second option that I've given is really powerful, because Tealium can provide all of the in the moment, in session data to that model. So it has that in the moment data to make a more tailored experience. So we're talking event-based data. So what 5 events have happened within this session? The session-based data. So across those 5 events, what's happened within that section? And then even then, the third level is the visitor-based data. So all data as part of a platform that has been combined together. AI and ML love that. They love contextualized data. They love highly typed data. And obviously this is consented data as well. So AI models love that. And so that's one of the biggest features that I see a lot of our customers attempting to do, is to have Tealium feed all of that data, that in-session event-based and visitor-based data, into the models to bring back a much more relevant experience. And then on top of that, there are definitely other methods, as far as like triggering a large language model within a solution like Salesforce Cortex to be able to get back product recommendations, that, using a platform just to really affect the customer experience in the moment. Those are some of the great types of use cases that I've seen our customers do, and that I'm personally excited to try to implement, because it just really helps bring value to the customer from a brand perspective when they're on the site, to be able to really focus on that specific individual.
Yeah, great. I think you meant Snowflake Cortex.
Yes, I did. Thank you.
You're on a roll. That's all good. So that's interesting. And Amlan, I'd love to hear how you at PepsiCo, or you guys, are using AI to either enhance consumer experiences and or I know you have the B2B customer experiences, but what are you guys up to?
Sure. Yeah. And, maybe again, a slightly broader sort of perspective, right? I think Dan provided a few sort of care about in the framing of the model, et cetera, very, very well. So let me provide a little bit more in terms of how we're sort of thinking about the commercial, or rather the customer and the consumer space from an AI standpoint. I mean, obviously, being a food and beverage company, CPG company, you can imagine, right? The understanding of the consumer is absolutely critical. So what are real-time shifts happening in consumer tastes, being, consumers becoming more experiential or more functional oriented choices, multicultural, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, how do these shifts get picked up, right? So I think one of the things that we're trying to drive AI into is how can we drive more precise product portfolio innovation. So leveraging some of this data, using AI for that. Then also becoming hyper-personalized, which again, obviously is very much in your wheelhouses, hyper-personalized in our marketing to individual consumer, right? So how can we get personalization at scale, as you would call it, right? Through AI, and now increasingly with Gen AI as a capability. And so as you think about personalization at scale, also we're looking at how do we leverage AI for creating more AI-powered marketing content. So there is definitely a productivity angle in terms of how do we unleash more and more the power of AI into the life of, or day in the life of a marketing professional. And there are also capabilities where I would say it's more quote unquote on the traditional AI side. It's funny that we talk about, machine learning and data science now as traditional AI, but, clearly we have a lot of focus on things like ROI measurements, right, from our media as something that we also have invested in significantly. That again are more towards more traditional machine learning and data science related capabilities. And then on the customer side, there are many different use cases you can think of from a go-to-market side. But one I would call out is really leveraging Gen AI and then more agentic workflows in, call it, the creation of the next gen integrated customer contact center. All right. So that's where we're seeing quite a lot of leverage of AI and Gen AI in potentially agents to simplify sort of the day in the life workflows in the interactions as you get calls and or interactions with the contact center. So and then beyond that, broadly, how do we impact the day in the life of various go-to-market profiles or roles using Gen AI as well? So just again at a macro level, if you look at the consumer and the customer space, a lot of different areas of focus.
Yeah, that's great. That rhymes with what we're seeing for sure. So it's like the personalization at scale is, if you can personalize across web, mobile, call center, branch, store, kiosk, you are going to have a much better consumer experience. And we're seeing that be kind of the North Star for most of our customers. But then the other North Star is efficiency, right? Because AI, the board level mandates for AI for every company here are, hey, grow faster with AI and do it more efficiently with AI. It's kind of like these. I do think we should unpack something you mentioned, Amlan, which is the media space in particular, because we are seeing our customers enjoy massive savings when they deploy the conversion APIs from a Google or a Meta or a Snapchat or TikTok or a Reddit or any other, long tail or mid tail media in source. And these companies are spending billions of dollars, and so, or tens of millions of dollars, or even just millions of dollars. And so a 26% average improvement in return on ad spend, that really helps us achieve that efficiency mandate, right? And you can take that 26% savings and either drop it to the bottom line, or you redeploy it into more marketing and you can grow faster, right? So Dan, why don't you unpack that? This is one of your specialties of helping companies get their data really tight, because we have to send through those conversion APIs the right data to get the highest signal. And then behind those conversion APIs are these massive media companies, and they're all using AI, right, to figure out what audiences to help you target.
Yeah, that's a really key element from how many businesses are looking to operate, because you're taking it back just to tie it to how Amlan and how you finished that when you're talking about the data supply chain and where you're seeing agentic, because it's a really important element when you think about a recommendation and you have a agentic service out there that has access to what products are available. And then you have that service also hits the supply chain front to see what's actually available within the ecosystem. When you're talking CPG and large, very, very large quantities, it could be a lot different from a retailer who doesn't have very large quantities. And then that service is also hitting an API from a platform like Tealium to bring in that visitor data and marry it all together to understand what you actually need to deliver to the customer. What that does then is it presents the offer that you need to give to the customer to try to get them to purchase. And if they don't purchase, there's a flow you want to put this user on, right? You want to be able to all those vendors that Jeff was mentioning, as far as Facebooks and Pinterests and the Snaps and the TikToks of the world, to try to get in front of that customer, to try to get them to come back into the website or the mobile app and drive them to make a purchase. Those are all of the marketing campaigns to drive that user to get the to get that conversion to occur. The measurement of those are the conversion pixels and the conversion APIs, which is it's all tied together, right? It's all part of the business operations as far as targeting somebody, but the measurement of that, having a platform in place to be able to support the measurement of that is just important. So like when Jeff's saying the 20%, 26% increase, that comes down to all of the browser restrictions that are out there today, network signal loss and ad blockers, everything that's existing client side that makes it harder to measure that. The conversion APIs that exist server to server with all of those vendors is what allows you to see that increase. As a matter of fact, Facebook just made an increase that they're almost at the point where I believe they're at like 90 to 95% measurement that they can attach to an individual from a conversion event that occurred on a digital property to somebody on their backend system. Like that improvement to be able to understand the return on ad spend is massive when you're talking tens of millions of dollars that a company's putting into their marketing efforts. And what's great about that is not only are you getting the measurement increase on this, but all of that rich first party data can still be sent to those vendors as well, so that the lookalike modeling they do can be improved. And everything that they're doing on the back end to help from the advertising perspective is now they're able to use that from an AI perspective because they have much and much improved correlated data sets, meaning data across all the different sources that's consented, that's first party, that they're then able to use to be able to understand who to better target.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So Amlan, I wanted to circle back on the Gen AI in your contact center. You know, a lot of people here on the webinar have heard about RAG architecture and context windows, and you know, how do you put together these Gen AI solutions and fine tune them, and then how do you put up guardrails to prevent them from hallucinating? Do you have any insight in Pepsi's journey there on, you know, are you doing a RAG architecture for your Gen AI? And then at real time, at time of inference, are you taking like real time visitor data to populate the context windows so that they know they have that up to the millisecond context? Or are you like looking back at the loyalty program or something? Just kind of give us a sense of what data you're using to fuel that Gen AI to give it a personalized feel.
Yeah, you know, I think it's like, I think with most enterprises, we're at that point of also sort of maturing, I would say, rapidly as the space is taking off. A lot of the use cases, at least at this point, are still, I would say, what would be, particularly from a Gen AI, agentic AI sorts of use cases, are more on the batch side of things as opposed to maybe leveraging real time. But I mean, I'm pretty sure that shift is coming. But you know, obviously, a lot of recognition, as we've seen with the rest of the industry, right? And I recall, I think a few weeks back, there was a MIT study that came out, right? 95% of Gen AI projects are not being successful, right? And so one of the things that people are now recognizing, which is quite intuitive, is that knowledge layer or the semantic layer is absolutely critical. You can have the best technology in the world, but if your data and then your metadata and the labeling, and in many cases, essentially the knowledge graph layer is not robust, right? Then the degree, to your point, the degree of hallucination that you're going to see is going to be that much more. So that's where a lot of the focus has been, and we're starting to see where we have focused efforts on really ensuring that the quality of metadata and then the quality of that knowledge layer is robust, that the results that we're seeing from the Gen AI implementations are that much better. So hopefully that gives you a read. Again, I don't think I have specifics in terms of when or where we're going to make that shift. I would say from call it more batch-oriented use cases to real time. But I feel like we need to get some of these basics in place, and because the barrier I feel to entry towards getting into more real-time use cases is going to be that much more, just
Yeah.
because your responsiveness or the need to be that much more responsive is going to be that much higher as you get into more of the real-time use cases, particularly from an agentic AI standpoint.
Yeah, it's kind of wild when you hear the futurists talk about it, where they're saying we're going to have at-scale personalization, which you mentioned, and every consumer is going to have on-the-fly personalized content just generated for their digital experience by an AI, and you're kind of like, wow, how in the world could we do that compared to what we're doing today? But to your point, it all goes to having that core foundational architecture right. And then you get some data labeling, and Dan mentioned it earlier, where Tealium, that you kind of created the sense of a high-speed cache that has that behavioral data about the consumers that is available, so that the model can retrieve it in real time when someone makes a query. And it's as you point out, it's every month this stuff's getting better and better and more capable. So the future is going to be wild, but it all goes back to, do you or do you not have a great data layer to start with? And from a privacy first standpoint, does that data layer understand the consent status of this data? And so those two things are absolutely critical. So we had two questions from the audience I wanted to circle back on. Amlan, Patricia Miller asks, agree on marketing and go-to-market strategies, thoughts on supply chain front. So is there anything you all are doing with AI and supply chain? That would be very interesting.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like I said, our AI and Gen AI efforts are basically looking at literally the entire value chain, right? So commercial consumer obviously being a big focus area, but then as we move into the rest of the areas, be it supply chain, be it even more of our core enabling functions like finance and procurement, and everywhere we're starting to see that. So one of the things that we are looking at in supply chain, for example, from a manufacturing standpoint, and even warehousing, the applicability of digital twins is something with the now with the proliferation of synthetic data and the capability that you're getting from a digital twin standpoint is something that we're actively exploring, right? So operational digital twins and engineering digital twins. So that's one area we are absolutely looking at. Then from an overall Gen AI, agentic AI standpoint, as we sort of think about our profit to serve sort of use cases, again, having that ability for let's say the business users to be able to on the fly, almost like a chatbot like experience, to really determine which are the profitable SKUs in a very granular way, is giving that kind of insight and intelligence, which now with Gen AI is being available. Again, sort of not to harp on the point, you need to have that very strong data foundation. But now with the availability of Gen AI, you can make some of these use cases available at the fingertips of the users. So just again, a couple of examples, but that more are being explored literally as we sort of think about every single aspect of supply chain, from manufacturing, warehousing, to procurement and others.
Yeah, great stuff. So Dan, the second question is, how can we ensure our AI agent or chatbot is safe? What specifically should we be sure to check?
Yeah, there are a few elements I think of when I think about like non-human interactions or opt-out options. What we're seeing from an applicable standpoint on this is, if the data is not consented, we're not even collecting it in the first place to be able to include it within an AI system. So that's on a real-time data capture standpoint. There are elements that we're seeing customers that that are leveraging Tealium. Obviously, as I mentioned, there's the real-time caching system. So you have really the concept of, it's a three-tiered architecture, just to kind of set a foundation here of, you have the transactional system on the back end, and you have a lake house in the middle, and then you have a real-time high-performance mirrored cache system on the front end. And so those first two don't always have a consent element to them. So it's that last element of that high performance real-time system where the consumer consent is being captured, of whether or not you can know to include that information within an AI model. So if it's not consented, it won't be sent out to that lake house to even be included within the AI model. I'm even seeing some of the customers that have discussed in the last few weeks talk about how, if there's data within the system and there's no consent tied to it, to not even include that within the platform. So that's a couple of different elements that we see. I'm even seeing, like, even within the Tealium user interface, you have the concept of turning off AI capabilities that Tealium offers to make sure that, from a regulatory standpoint, that if it's a highly regulated industry, that AI is not being used to train on this data model. So those are some of the key areas that I'm seeing. But as far as I believe the question had regulatory requirements like disclosures and notices about AI, a lot of that goes within the privacy policy of the digital device that's being operated with, and making it available through those types of notices, so that when consent is prompted, depending on the region, like GDPR versus CCPA, and how the company interprets how they want to display consent to them, that can or cannot be included within the consent modal, and just depends on how the business wants to operate against it.
Yeah, yeah. Amlan, is there anything you all do specifically around the disclosure about AI and capturing consent?
Yeah, I mean, we have a whole responsible AI policy.
Yeah.
And then actually, we've even gone further, and there's actually a dedicated team that deals with it, coming up with policies and really being abreast of what's happening in the external space around this, and continuing to update and upgrade our thinking and policies around it. So that's not necessarily my wheelhouse, but yes, it's a very holistic, robust, detailed set of policies and procedures that are available as clear, responsible AI guidelines.
Yes, we did another discussion last week, and what we're seeing and what the other enterprises in that discussion were talking about is most companies are finding that they kind of need an AI project approval board that basically checks the architecture. To your point, Amlan, earlier, the architecture itself is what has to be privacy first and compliance first. And so before you actually can start, and what the discussion was you kind of, if you just have this board and you let people build for 3 months and then you put stuff in front of the board, you're wasting time in many cases. So what they're doing is they're taking these board members and they're embedding them in the rapidly developed, builder teams, so that, it's kind of like just embedding journalism on a war front or something. It's kind of like these are embedded AI privacy first policy board members that are out there in the field with the builders, and they also are collaborating, and that way you can hopefully assure that when it's time to get the final sign off, that you don't run into some huge roadblock.
Exactly. And we're doing something very, very similar. We actually, I mean, you cannot really get anything with Gen AI or agentic AI, kind of even a pilot activated, if you will, without going through this approval, right? So we've just made it very, very clear upfront itself, right? I mean, you have to go through a couple of these stage gates, and obviously, as you can imagine, there would be a little bit of resistance initially, like, why do we have so many hoops to jump through? But to your point, I think it becomes absolutely critical that due diligence is done before people go off and start building stuff.
Yes, and I think it's an opportunity for vendors to build a trust framework so that they, are recognized and respected. That, okay, if you're working with vendor X, then we know that the way they're going to help us handle the data is going to be compliant. Because it's, if you think about it, this whole vibe coding movement is a 180 opposite of this expanding global data regulation and privacy movement. And so you can vibe code all day long, but you can't do it if you work for a big company or any company, because, we used to talk about regulated industries like healthcare, telco, finance. But guess what? These global data privacy regulations don't care what industry you're in.
Exactly.
So everyone is a regulated company now, and privacy by design is critical through the whole data supply chain, plus through the AI. Let's see, more questions here. Someone asked about the security of the data. This is obviously, with the explosion of data, the attack surface has gotten larger, and so clever hackers can now find new ways, new paths into this sensitive data. And I'm not a cybersecurity expert, and I know Dan, you probably help us sit through some of these security reviews from the largest banks in the world, like you might have done last Friday. So can you give us any sense of, and then we'll go to Amlan as well, on how we make sure we secure this data?
Yeah, there are two elements from my side of the house on how a typical data solution would look at this. The first is if the solution itself is hosting the data, and the second one is if we're sharing the data outbound. And really what it comes down to when you talk about a solution provider storing data within a system. So it gets back to almost like what Alman was talking about earlier, as far as like the data regulations and where the data has to be stored. For example, the Germany data has to stay within Germany, right? The US data, it can't cross international lines. You also want that data to be readily available within a data center in region, so that you're not trying to target a user within Asia and pulling data from the US, right? And having a delay with that data. So the residency of that data is key, but having data centers that are global data centers that are available based on the region of where that consumer exists. We work very closely with our provider to make sure that we are leveraging their best practices for as far as data storage, data collection, encryption algorithms, rotation of keys, and just having a really robust security practice, including like disaster recovery and business continuity, and leveraging those types of InfoSec practices to make sure that if we're storing data on behalf of a customer, that we're doing it in the strongest way possible. The best way to describe that is when you're talking about a regulated industry of healthcare and pharma, health insurance, and making sure that you're dealing with HIPAA-based data and having SOC 2 Type 2 compliance to show that you have the standards in place to store this data properly, and you've been doing it long enough that there are not any errors with the way that you've configured this or stored the data. So that's one piece of making sure that the vendor set that you're using is highly compliant. The second piece of that I was mentioning is sharing the data back to an enterprise data foundation that's Google, Azure, Snowflake, struggling now that I said Salesforce earlier, but then a Databricks, and making sure that the data that you're passing to those platforms is also highly secure. So that comes back to leveraging a platform that's doing a server to server data transfer, so that your authentication protocols or your keys are done server to server, and trying to prevent client side to server side delivery within those types of systems that are considered extremely, extremely sensitive. So in other words, taking data from a call center or a mobile app or a website and sending it to an intermediary product solution that can then manage the server to server data transfer of that. So you're, in a sense, you're putting a security by layers in there, so that to ensure that you're doing as best as you can to prevent some of that data hacking that could be out there.
Yep. Amlan, anything to add on the cybersecurity front?
Yeah, and like you, Jeff, I'm not a cybersecurity expert, right? But in talking to, obviously, Dan gave a very in-depth sort of a response on, technically speaking, what's going on. But just talking to our cybersecurity team, and just some external perspectives as well, just the attack surfaces are that much larger now, right? With the advent in particular of Gen AI and agentic AI. So, there's this now, the model risks are coming in where people are talking about model inversion. So you almost, looking at the model itself and trying to then infer from that, so actors are looking at how to invert the model and draw inferences from it. From the chatbots, so there are risks from the prompts itself of being leading to some additional exposure that is coming in. There is a problem that is being now sort of surfaced in terms of agents. If you're not governing them appropriately, they might be over-provisioned. So you now have more vulnerability as a part of over-provision agents. And then, just the attack surfaces are expanded if you think about APIs and chatbots that are proliferating. So, and not to mention, obviously, Dan covered that in a lot of detail, which is around the privacy side, right? So violation of consent and things of that kind, because again, you're getting into the real time. So as a result of all of these, it's compounding essentially the attack surfaces.
The never-ending game of cat and mouse
Exactly.
is just gonna never end. So I wanted to spend just a second on vector databases and graph databases. You mentioned earlier, Amlan, and you are a data expert. So in the Gen AI use cases, the way I understand it, a consumer is going to put in a prompt, and then you're going to combine that prompt. You're going to go hit a vector database, and maybe you're also going to hit a graph database, and then you're going to take all that and you're going to send it to the LLM to get an answer. And so, A, is that correct? And then B, what kind of data goes in a vector database and what kind of data goes in a graph database in, for the layman, simple Navy pilot like me?
Yeah, so I think the simple way to sort of think about it is anything that is the metadata obviously has to be, you have to come up with embeddings and labeling, and that then is part of your vector store.
Okay.
So if you really need to come, for example, go query a structured database from a text to SQL standpoint, you have to go hit the vector store and then be able to go come up with that structured query into the data warehouse of the database. In the case of graph, what we're seeing is much more, and we're obviously exploring at this point in time, is when you have very complex sort of joins in a multi functional sort of a setup, right? That's where the graph is, or the knowledge graph is becoming that much more important, particularly in terms of being able to come up with the complex query results back in a performant manner. That's where you're leveraging the graph. So it's not necessarily almost like an either or, if you will. It's more an and proposition.
Yeah.
So in almost all of the cases, you'll need obviously a vector database or a vector store, but then the leverage of graph, or particularly a knowledge graph, as a part of your semantic model is maybe not every single query that the user is sending across requires probably a knowledge graph. But you could if you wanted to. So it's, that's where the complexity comes in terms of the architecture. You could represent everything as a knowledge graph, but you don't have to, is the way to sort of think about it.
Got it. Yeah. Fascinating. Okay, so we have 5 minutes to go. Questions from the audience. Shoshana said, I've seen either the chatbot leverage the consent stored within the browser cookies or the chatbot explicitly request consent. Oh, Shoshana was answering. Thank you for that other question. And Dan, we're building stuff on the fly here at Tealium, and this idea of graph at the data layer, applying or seeing what relationship. Could you kind of double click on that on how we might be able to leverage graph databases to see the, for at the visitor level, like people who like this thing, like, okay, I'm a PepsiCo lover. I love my Diet Mountain Dew, and I also like my my Gatorade Zero. And so maybe through the loyalty program, you might want to, promote some Gatorade Zero to me or something like that.
Yeah, and I think that, I'm on the ideas that you gave as far as how the vector versus the graph database are key, to try to take that and tie it to Jeff's question here. So at a higher level, thinking about like a vector database is great for it. Actually, it represents the essence of the data that's available, whereas the graph is like the entity that ties it all together. So in a relationship, like what's the shortest path between these entities, that would be a graph database, whereas a vector would be find all things that also look like this other thing, and because it's using numerical computation in the vector database to try to find those likelihoods versus the graph, which works based off of the entity relationship. So that's why I'm saying it's a supplemental. It's the combination of them. So
Yeah.
to get to Jeff's question, as far as to be able to find the appropriate product based off of the history of your visitor data set, that's really why you would need both, because you need to be able to store the data in a way that you can find those relationships and the likelihood that this person may be like this other person, as well as then what's the appropriate recommendation to make to these people based off of the data sets and the lookalike modeling. So that's where both of them come into play. And when you're talking about product recommendations, and just trying to tie all this back together here as we're kind of nearing the end here, that's why you need a data foundation in place to with those 3 tiers that I was mentioning earlier, to be able to have the appropriate data to train your model, so that your model's based on strong, highly typed, consented data sets, so that then your model can have access to both the graph and the vector database, so that it can find like users and what recommendation to make to them. And if you're able to bring that into the real-time platform, that's when you're able to make the appropriate recommendation to that customer in the moment.
Yeah, in the moment, in session. Well, that's I guess one last question that we thought was interesting is, what are there any misconceptions out there that prevent us, so some senior leader says, well, I'm never going to use AI to talk to my customers because it's going to hallucinate. That to me is kind of the most common misconception I hear. And what I've seen is that now, yes, there were 15% of answers had a hallucination 3 years ago, and now it's less than 1%. So what I tell our folks is always fly the airplane looking out of the front of the cockpit. Assume the stuff's getting better and better, like tech always does. Don't make business decisions based on what it is today or what it was a year ago. Amlan, what do you guys?
Yeah. So I think, a couple of things. One is, to your point, I think that's the key piece, right? Which is the technology is so rapidly evolving, improving, expanding, that what might be a constraint today, in a month from now, may not be a constraint anymore, right? So that's a one sort of approach to take whenever you feel like, hey, this thing is really not quite there, or whatever use case you're looking at. Number two, I think there is a bit of a change management that is required as well, right? So we're going from a largely deterministic paradigm where people are reliant on a dashboard or a scorecard where the value is always the same,
Yeah.
into a stochastic or probabilistic paradigm. And so that change has to happen in people's mindset in terms of the response that you're getting. It may not be exactly